an impressive.
Hi everyone.
To see like girls, because no girls.
For
The
those
best place to go if you're a gay boy.
do we need the mic? Is this better? Yeah, okay. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Anat Balit. I'm from the Center for Judaic Studies. I carry very proudly the chair of Modern Israel Studies, so I teach about Israel, which is a very light topic to talk about, of course. And I'm very happy to see all of you here, and welcome to the annual Rafael Patai Memorial Lecture. And I'm very excited to have Dr. Tor Persico with us, and even more so Dr. Jennifer Schneider. Hi. And it's with the generosity of the Patai family and Jennifer Schneider and her sister Daphne Patai that we could invite Tomer Persico to come and talk to us tonight. And I will just mention the very special and interesting Patai family. And the lecture series is named after Rafael Patai, the father of Jennifer Schneider and Daphne Patai, who was an ethnographer, a historian, I think a great lover of Israel, and very interested in Jewish culture in the Middle East in general, and wrote extensively on these topics. He was also teaching in the Hebrew University and later in the United States, and so left a very, very interesting heritage behind him. He passed away in '96. So it's with the generosity of his daughters that we can really bring to Tucson most interesting scholars to talk about, well, in the same area. Dr. Tomer Persico, we wanted to bring him over here for a long time, and we finally did. He's going to dedicate his lecture today to talk about Jewish fundamentalism, and I cannot think of more timely topic to talk about Jewish fundamentalism than these days. I will introduce his very impressive titles, and then I will say a few words that are a little bit less formal. So Dr. Tomer Persico is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute, a Rubinstein fellow at the Reichman University, and a senior research scholar at the UC Berkeley Center for Middle Eastern Studies. He is a scholar of contemporary spirituality in Judaism, Jewish modern identity, Jewish renewal and forms of secularization and religiosity in Israel. He dedicated his doctoral work to meditation in Judaism. So that's very interesting, and he published his first book on this topic. And he recently published his second book, which is called In God's Image, Selfhood, Freedom, and Equality, which was published in Hebrew and soon to be published by NYU Press in English, so there's things to wait. And I want to say, so after saying, these very long and impressive titles, I would say that Dr. Persico has a unique presence in Israeli public discourse because he is an academic that personally, I believe, the kind that academics should be. He really lives in between the academia and public conversation and makes a lot of topics about Jewish identity, the many shades of Judaism, Israeli identity and politics accessible to wider audiences. He's a publicist, he writes a lot. You should follow him on Twitter as well. He has a blog, so he's not just sitting up there and kind of writing, texts that very few read, but actually is provoking the thoughts of many people to think about things differently. He's going to talk about the streams in Judaism in Israel that became much more dominant and influential in Israeli politics in recent years. So, Dr. Persico.
Thank you so much, Anat, and thank you all for coming here. I want to really thank the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies for inviting me. I want to thank Jackie Smith for organizing, Anat, of course, for the initiative, and of course Professor Daphne Patai and Dr. Jennifer Schneider for their generosity that allowed all this to happen. So I'm going to talk about Jewish fundamentalism, and I want to zoom in on these few groups in Israel that are Jewish and fundamentalist, extremist, religious Jews. And in order to zoom in, I want to take the broad picture first and show you really what we're talking about. So in general terms, we can divide or analyze Israeli society according to these major groups. In general, we've got the secular Jews who are 46%. We don't have Jewish denominations, of course, in Israel, but types of Jewish identity. Seculars, about 46%. We've got traditionals, about 31%. These are the two groups that are either more religious or less religious. We then got 12% of religious Zionists in Israel. And we've got about 11% of ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews. Okay, so this is the broad picture of Jewish identity in Israel today. Really in general terms, of course, we can dissect and differentiate between different types of secular Jews, etc., but these are, in general, the groups. We are going to talk about this 12%, part of religious Zionism, which is fundamentalist. And if we take these 12%, in general also we can divide religious Zionism into progressive religious Zionism, about 15%, mainstream religious Zionism, about 65%, and then we've got fundamentalist religious Zionism, about 20% of religious Zionism. Now, what do I mean by progressive? Maybe I'll say, don't immediately translate this to American terms. They're not left-wing, these 15% progressive religious Zionists, but they will be pro-LGBT rights, they will be feminist, most of them, etc. And then we've got mainstream religious Zionism, which is your run-of-the-mill Israeli religious Zionist. They have integrated values of the liberal order and democracy, and then of course they observe the halakha in an orthodox way, etc. And we've got fundamentalist religious Zionism. So these are what we're going to talk about, and I want to now, after bringing a sort of a demographic picture, to bring you up to date historically, and I want to run by a brief history of religious Zionism. What are we talking about then? We're talking about a movement that began with this Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Reines, who was Herzl's right-hand man in all terms religious. He joined his movement that he called the Mizrahi to the Zionist movement. This was from the first Zionist Congress in 1897. And I want to read what he writes in a public letter 1900 years. All those who think that this idea, Zionism, is any matter of future redemption and the arrival of the Messiah, and therefore see it as a destruction of one of the main pillars of our sacred faith, which is waiting for the Messiah passively, are wrong. There is not a bit of redemption in it. The whole essence of this idea and its foundation is nothing but an improvement of the situation of our unfortunate brethren. Right? So he takes great care, Reines, to make clear that Mizrahi or religious Zionist Jews are not messianic. They're not waiting for the Messiah. They're not bringing the Messiah. They are just wanting a pragmatic solution for Jews in the diaspora. This is, the end of the 19th century. There are pogroms in Ukraine, etc. We want a safe haven, that's all. Okay? This is the beginning of religious Zionism. And indeed, this was religious Zionism even until 1967. This is from June 5th, 1967, the first day of the Six-Day War. And this is the leader of religious Zionism at that time, the political leader, Moshe Chaim Shapira, was then the Minister of Interior Affairs in Israel. And he says in a government meeting, if the old city will be in our hands, Jerusalem, and they come and propose to make it an international city, I will agree to it. This is the level of dovishness, we say in Hebrew, right? Sort of left-wingness that religious Zionist leaders then held. Okay, they would internationalize Jerusalem were it in our hands, which of course it was in a matter of days, right? And again, Zerach Heftig, the Minister of Religious Affairs at that same time, I am thrilled that the halakha decrees that the third temple ought to be built by God and not man. I am thrilled as this means we are not entering into a struggle with the Muslim faith, right? So we do have the Temple Mount in our hands after 67, but we're waiting for God to bring the temple from the sky, just drop it down perfectly unmasked. We're not doing anything about it, and I'm thrilled about it because it means we're not engaging in a conflict with the Muslim faith. Great. Again, just to show the attitude of religious Zionism at that time. Just to imagine a religious Zionist leader, political leader today saying anything remotely like this is impossible. And what changed? What changed is, of course, 67 and the occupation of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and the creation of Gush Emunim. Gush Emunim, the organization, the movement, translated literally as cluster of faith, the organization that spearheaded the settlement project in Judea and Samaria. These are the people, religious Zionists, as you can see. This picture is they are celebrating the first time that the government let them stay in a settlement in the occupied territories, in Judea and Samaria. This was the first settlement, right? And they're celebrating. This is what changed. And what changed is a younger generation of religious Zionists challenging the older generation, challenging their dovish left-wing opinions and ideals, and proposing new ideals, new opinions that say that not only is religious Zionism not passively waiting for the Messiah, not simply seeking for a safe haven for Jews in Israel, but quite the opposite. Religious Zionism is a messianic movement wanting to bring about the coming of the Messiah. And it was headed by, the spiritual leader at that time was this man, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who I'm bringing you a typical quote. It is revealed, God be praised before our very eyes, and there is no more room for any doubt or for any question. The end has come, the end of days, the end of times. The Messiah is arriving. And he, again, was the spiritual leader of Gush Emunim, and the law that he proposed, the theology that he offered was such. The more Jews settle on the land of Israel by the decree of the state of Israel, the closer the Messiah is coming. Okay? The closer we are to Messianic times. This had to do with an understanding that when Jews fasten themselves to the land of Israel by the legitimation and the agency of the state of Israel, it is as if God's will through his people is fastening itself, uniting itself with the land. So this unification of the three, God, people, and land, will inevitably bring about messianic times. Now, the interesting thing here is that there is another clause to this messianic plan. That clause says that it is irreversible, that it is a one-way street, that it is totally deterministic. There is no way back from this messianic rush to the end of times. And so there can be no withdrawal from occupied territory. Any territory that the state of Israel has conquered, liberated as it were, in its wars, cannot be given back, cannot be withdrawn from. Now obviously we know that Israel did withdraw. It withdrew from the Sinai Desert, the whole of the Sinai Desert in 82 with the peace accords with Egypt. It withdrew from all the major Palestinian cities in the Oslo Accords, beginning of the 90s. It withdrew in the year 2000 from the whole of the southern of Lebanon, which there were no settlements there, but for many people it was a part of the Holy Land, right, for believers. And finally, it withdrew from Gaza in 2005, dismantling 20-something settlements and really vacating 8,000 people from their homes in the Gaza Strip. And this blow after blow after blow after blow finally collapsed and fragmented the Cookist ideal, the Cookist messianic theology. And Cookism is no more as a viable theological framework in Israel. So religious Zionism is left with no unifying theology for itself. Okay, and this brings us up to date. This brings us to here again, to these three groups, major groups of religious Zionists in Israel, and again we are going to talk about fundamentalist religious Zionism. So, what are we talking about? We've got four types of Jewish fundamentalism today in Israel. We've got the Chardal, we've got Kahanism, we've got the Hilltop Youth, and the Temple Mount activists. Chardal are a type of stringent, very devoted, very pious religious Zionists that hold messianic ideas, not imminent as in Cookist times. It's not that the Messiah is coming tomorrow, right? But they are very active towards bringing about messianic times, and they are very diligent about it. Kahanism is the movement or the idea, the ideational framework that came out of Meir Kahana's lore. I will say, of course, more about this soon. The Hilltop Youth are groups of youngish people, about teens to 30-somethings, that live on the outskirts, on the fringes of the settlements in Judea and Samaria, usually in illegal outposts, illegal even according to Israeli law, not only according to international law. And they hold a romantic view of their faith, and I will of course expand upon this. And we've got Temple Mount activists. Temple Mount activists, people who over the last 15 years have grown, very much grown in number, who want to either ascend the Temple Mount and pray there, or actually build the third temple of Israel on the Temple Mount, which I assume you know is taken. The place is of course also Al-Aqsa, Haram al-Sharif. It's taken by the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Muslims are praying there every day, of course. Let's talk about them. Now, first let's, for a minute, try to understand what fundamentalism is. First of all, it's, in general, a form of religious faith and social framework, it's supposed to be, seeking to preserve traditional identity in face of modernity. Fundamentalism is a modern phenomenon. It's a modern religious phenomenon trying to resist modernity, resist processes of modernity such as secularization, liberalization, etc., modern humanism, and trying to preserve its own identity by resisting modernity. How do they do that? Usually, we're talking about a constraint of a religious tradition into a limited framework of fundamental principles. So it's a narrowing down of a very broad and rich tradition into a few basic principles that are considered the fundamentals, thus tightening and toughening the tradition, as it were. It is also a submission to the authority of the Holy Scriptures, usually interpreted literally, while refusing to tolerate other layers of interpretation which would allow flexibility. In any tradition, there are many different ways to interpret the Holy Scriptures. Fundamentalism usually takes the literal interpretation and rejects other types of interpretation, such as allegory or sort of hermeneutics, etc., and narrows down the fields of interpretation. We've got a consolidated view of history, meaning history is seen as a monolithic, unchanging essence. What was true and correct 3,000 years ago is true and correct today. There is no need to update anything because nothing fundamental has changed. Basically, we're living in the same time as Joshua or Moses or Abraham or King David, right? Same thing. So what worked for them is going to work for us. This allows an integration or an importation of values and ideas from literal biblical stories into the present. And finally, in fundamentalist groups with messianic and universal pretensions, there is an attempt to shape the social and political world beyond the group's borders. So there is activism, there is missionarism. Okay, we're trying to change society. We're trying to shape society as aligned with our ideals and ideas. So let's begin. Khardal. I'm beginning with that. Khardal is an acronym of Haredi Leumi, meaning ultra-Orthodox national, right? So the ultra-Orthodox, as a rule, are not Zionists. They're not nationalists. They are their own type of fundamentalists living in close, tight-knit communities, really being concerned mostly about community and continuity of their own. Khardal is a part of religious Zionism that takes characteristics of the ultra-Orthodox but melds them with nationalism. This is Bezalel Smotrich, our Minister of Finance as we speak. And what differentiates Khardal from the rest of religious Zionism, if you ask an Israeli what differentiates them, usually they would say, they're more strict, they're more observant of the halakha, they're more pious, in their observation of the halakha, which is true, but that's not the main difference. The main difference is that like Haredi Jews, like ultra-Orthodox Jews, they will reject modern values. They will take it as a project to resist humanism, to resist feminism, to resist the whole discourse of human rights, to resist the liberal order. They will make it their duty, their job to push those away, like the ultra-Orthodox. And not unlike most religious Zionists, which have no principal problem with these values. They, of course, they're not the greatest progressive activists, but they will have integrated basically the values of the liberal order. Now, Smotrich himself has published in 2017 what he calls the decisiveness plan. It can also be translated as subjugation plan, Tochnit HaHachra'ah, which says that Palestinians in Israel, including Arab Israelis, Arab citizens of Israel, have to either surrender and become residents with reduced rights, emigrate, or fight and die. Okay, this is published, print, in 2017. Smotrich takes care to mention that any Palestinian staying within the greater Israel will have reduced rights, will not have equal civil rights to Jews as a matter of principle, because that's halakha, in his idea, that's Judaism. And he takes all this idea, all these three options, from a midrash, from a Talmudic story about Joshua coming to the land of Israel and offering these same options to the peoples of Israel at that time, to the Canaanites, as it were, right? So what works for Joshua works for us, no problem, copy-paste, right? That's what we do. And why is this fundamentalism? I want to read a quote out of Smotrich just to flesh this out. This is a speech he gave in 2016. There is one absolute and correct truth. that is the one and only basis for existence, and with which everybody needs to comply. This is the basis for the approach of Joshua when he entered the land, which I seek to adopt even today. The foundation of our absolute truth is faith in the Torah of Moses, which will not be replaced and over which no other will be given from the Creator, blessed be his name. Is the one and only base on which we must establish the belief in the righteousness of the way and the fighting spirit of the IDF. The fact that in the circles of Haaretz newspaper and in the general headquarters of the IDF there are those who think differently cannot be any excuse, simply because we are right and they are wrong.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? You know, it's really obvious. So this is the level of assuredness, of presumptiveness that Smotrich holds for his ideology, right? It's simply the truth, and everybody has to align with it. And if they don't want, tough, right? Because at other times, Smotrich says to Arab members of parliament, members of Knesset, you're only here by mistake because Ben-Gurion didn't finish the job and throw you out in 1948. A true Muslim must know that the land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel. In time, those who don't will not stay here. Arabs are Israeli citizens, at least for now. And Huwara should be wiped out, a Palestinian village. The state should do it, not, God forbid, regular people. And here he shows a little bit of his, what we call in Israel, the mamlachti, the republican or statist attitude that Smotrich holds. The state is holy, and it's the state's job to do everything, also these kinds of things. So this is the Khardal again, right? Smotrich is today their political leader, and they are perhaps the biggest group of the four that I am mentioning here. They're, again, if you saw, we're talking about 20% of religious Zionists, which are about 12% of Israelis, of Jewish Israelis, Jewish Israelis are about 8 million. We're talking about 200 to 300,000 people. That's the whole group that we're talking about, right? They're a small group, but again, they are very diligent and determined. Kahanism. Kahanism is the lore of the right-sided guy here, Rabbi Meir Kahana. Kahana was an American Jew who immigrated to Israel in the 70s. He then won a place in the Knesset. He had a seat in parliament in Israel and offered his lore, which was blatantly racist. Kahana offered rules while in parliament to segregate beaches between Jews and Arabs, laws that forbade with punishment sexual intercourse between Jews and Arabs in Israel. And these kinds of laws. Kahana was assassinated in 1990 by a Muslim extremist, but and shortly after his whole organization, the Kach movement, was deemed a terrorist organization both by the U.S. government and by the Israeli government. But his ideas continued in many different ways. One of the ways is being manifested today by Itamar Ben-Gvir. This is on the left side is Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of Internal Security, basically in charge of the police and the jails. Ben-Gvir is a Kahanist. He's an avowed Kahanist, and I will soon bring some quotes of his. And so it's a pretty prominent place in today's Israeli politics. The three pillars of Kahanism are basically these. First, racism. Jews are the superior race. All other humans are subhuman, are not equal to Jews. Rejection of secularism, liberalism, and democracy, and in that, even rejection of the Israeli state. Kahana didn't think the Israeli state is a legitimate entity because it is secular. It should be dismantled and a theocracy should be put in its place. And finally, idealization of revenge. There's a great deal about revenge in Kahanist texts, and I'll bring you two quotes. These are from this book, The Jewish Idea. There is no authority to any law or decision or decree by a government of evildoers that opposes the Torah, and it is a mitzvah to reject their authority. It is totally prohibited to accept the decisions of the evil majority. Whoever disputes the one view of God's Torah, even if it be a majority of the Jewish people, holds a perverted view. So, democracy, even of Jews, is illegitimate if it opposes the Torah. And of course, who knows the Torah? Meir Kahana knows the Torah, right? So anti-democratic blatantly, and about revenge, there is no loftier and more just virtue than that of vengeance. Vengeance is great because it revives God. The idea here is that God is weakened by the Holocaust of the 1940s, by 6 million Jews slaughtered by the Nazis, and God needs to be revived. How will God be revived? By vengeance, by spilling of Gentile blood by Jews. Okay? This is the idea. Okay? Is Ben-Gvir Kahanism light? Ben-Gvir tries to present himself as a new model of Kahanist. He's not really all that bad, he's not all that racist, he knows exactly what to say, but if you look closely, only a few years ago Ben-Gvir swore he is a determinate word-for-word Kahanist, right? 8 years ago Ben-Gvir said that the difference between him and Kahana was not in views or attributes, but maybe in style. The style is a little different. 6 years ago at a memorial for Kahana, a memorial service for the day that Kahana was assassinated, Ben-Gvir said that every word of Kahana is actual, sharp, meant for the reality we have today. And 4 years ago, in an interview, he argued that the big difference between him and Kahana is that they give us a microphone. And indeed they do. One final thing about Kahanism is this group. This group is called Lehava, a part of the Kahanist movement in Israel. Lehava is, you see, it says here, Mishmar Kavod HaYehudim Nilchamim Be'itbolelut. It's the Jewish honor guard fighting intermarriage. And Benzi Gopstein, the head of Lehava, again an avowed Kahanist, in an interview, I didn't write when this was, it was in 2016, he's asked by a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox journalist, do you support burning churches in Israel? So Gopstein says, Maimonides stated that they should be burned. Are you against Maimonides or where's Maimonides? So Rabinovich says, don't give me Maimonides. I asked what you think. So Gopstein says, of course we should. Now, this statement, along with a few others, cost Gopstein the right to run for parliament. He was disqualified for running for parliament because he is so avowedly violent. Ben-Gvir is more careful, and that's why Ben-Gvir could run for parliament and indeed become a minister. Temple Mount activism. So again, over the last 15 years, a great change has come to religious Zionists. Religious Zionism once was totally against ascending the Temple Mount. According to Jewish halakha, according to Jewish law, or at least according to every major rabbi over the last 200 years, Jews are forbidden to ascend the Temple Mount. It's matters of defilement and purity, all sorts of grades of this halachic distinction. It's also a matter of basic halachic sentiment, Jewish sentiment that what is holy should be shunned and looked from afar, should not be manipulated, should not be used by humans. But this has changed. Over the last 15 years, more and more Jews have been ascending the Temple Mount, religious Zionist Jews. There are a few social reasons at the background of this, which I won't get into. But basically, it has become a serious movement. Now, you see here, this is a picture that I took in the Machne Yehuda market in Jerusalem. This is a guy walking around with a great big temple flag, Ve'asu li mikdash. they built me a temple. This is God speaking, and this is a picture of the second temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And the guy also here has a picture of Kahana with a flag of Israel. So you see, obviously these groups intertwine. You know, the circles overlap in many ways. Now, I want to bring you 3 quotes from religious Zionist members of Knesset, members of parliament, about ascending the Temple Mount, and to try to understand through them what is special about their attitude towards the Temple Mount. Tzipri Khotobeli, today's Israel ambassador in the UK. The construction of the temple in its place on the Temple Mount should symbolize the renewal of the sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land. Feiglin, Moshe Feiglin was an MK for the Likud. It is not a religious thing, it's about sovereignty. We are here on the Temple Mount on a national mission. The menorah, the symbol of the state of Israel, will return in our day to illuminate our temple, God willing. And finally, Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich, our Minister of Finance. I will, God willing, ascend the Temple Mount when the ministers and the Knesset members will be able to ascend freely and upright for the realization of the sovereignty of the state of Israel on the Mount. What's interesting about these quotes, and they are very typical quotes, I brought 3 out of, I could have brought many more, is this. It's about sovereignty. It's about asserting dominance on the Temple Mount. So these people are ascending the Temple Mount not so much to worship God, to pray, although they do. And some of them, this for them is the main reason. But most of them, I would argue, ascend the Temple Mount in order to assert control over the holy site. Assert control from who? Obviously, or against who? Against the Palestinians. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? The Palestinians are there in their hundreds of thousands on Fridays. And so, for them it is a national struggle, and they are using the holy site as a part of their national struggle for control over the whole land. And this, I'm bringing you a quote from Ben Gvir, ascending the Temple Mount in July last year, okay? And he says, this is the most important place, we need to assert control here. This is a direct quote. So it's clear why he is on the Temple Mount. It's not for praying. And finally, the 4th group is the Hilltop youth. Again, groups that are living on the frontier, as it were, the outskirts of the settlements in Judea and Samaria, usually in illegal outposts, holding a very romantic sort of understanding of Judaism. They want as if to live biblically, so close to the land. Many of them are shepherds, dealing with agriculture also, and enjoying nature, and also very violent towards their Palestinian neighbors, which is part of their ethos. And I want to bring you a few examples. This is the burning of the village of Huwara by hundreds of Jews descending to the village. This is February 26, 2023. And this is Raphael Labor, a Hilltop person, right? Saying to camera, filming himself. There is something really exciting about this. What the army is unable to do, what the police will never ever do, simple Jews come and carry out a natural act of vengeance. Set fire to whatever they can. Vengeance here is for a terrorist act that killed 2 brothers the day before. Okay? So this is blood vengeance, but I want to emphasize the words a natural act of vengeance. It's natural. It's something that is flowing from the inner sentiments and emotions of these Jews. It's something organic. It's something authentic. This whole field of romantic language, romantic sentiments that are the engine behind the Hilltop youth existence. I'll give you another example For some, this is a Hilltop youth speaking, for some being an authentic Jew is attacking an Arab village. For others, it is composing a new Hasidic poem about love. Again, if you are excited, if this is something authentic, it is obviously something you should do in the romantic understanding of the Hilltop youth. It's very exciting to be violent towards Palestinians and to write a Hasidic poem about love. This is, it's natural. Okay, this is the idea. Now, these are very anarchistic groups. They have no hierarchy and they don't really listen to rabbis. Some of them even don't keep the halakha in an orthodox fashion. They are really, this is part of their ethos to be to be anarchic, right? But if you can identify some sort of spiritual leader for these groups, it's him, Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. And I will bring you a quote of Ginsburg that emphasizes what these Hilltop youths are about. Those who deeply understand will see that the purpose of everything is to reconcile with the natural being and to live as as a reflection of the true being, that is the Lord, blessed be He. This objective is hidden in reality, and in Israel, in effect, it already radiates. The glory of Israel is the glory of God. That is why in Israel, revenge takes on a special depth of God's revenge. Now, look back to the Jewish tradition. Can you remember ever an emphasis on authenticity, ever an emphasis on reuniting with nature or the natural? These are totally new ideas, totally modern ideas, basically imported here from German Romanticism. Fichte, Schelling, Herder, these kinds of thinkers that fueled, of course, fascism in Germany, and now are being taken as people who talk Judaism, right? Because this is what this is, right? Uniting with true being, etc. And again, the ideal of vengeance, of revenge. And indeed, this is a collage of graffiti with the word nekama in Hebrew, vengeance or revenge. And this is a price tag activity. Price tag is a name given by the Hilltop youth to their anti-Palestinian and anti-Israeli activity in Judea and Samaria. This is Amiram ben Uliel, brought to court. He was convicted of burning a house with a family of Palestinians inside it, murdering these Palestinians. He was convicted of it, and it's all part of this revenge ideal. They will do it not only in order to attack Palestinians and damage Palestinians, but also to sabotage, Israeli foreign relations. They are against the Israeli state. They think the Israeli state should be brought down and a theocracy should be instated instead of it, and they want to damage Israel in public opinion. This is, and I'm not even estimating this. These are actually things that they write down as instructions for their activists. That's basically our four groups. The problem today is, of course, is that this minority and minute fraction of the Israeli public has become dominant in politics, has gained very high seats of power in government. It is because basically because of Netanyahu's political and judicial problems. He needed every last single right-wing vote in order to stay in power, and so he brought them in and gave them a lot of power. This is Ben Gvir about today's Gaza war. Encouraging the immigration of Gaza residents will allow us to return the residents of Gush Katif, the settlements in the Gaza Strip, back home. This is already a plan how to settle Jews in the Gaza Strip. published in the Hardal popular synagogue leaflet Olam Katan, Small World, in the 11th of October, okay? 11th of October last year. And finally, I bring you perhaps the most grandiose fundamentalist that we have, Daniela Weiss, saying Gaza is only Gaza is only a part of the land of Israel, which is from the Euphrates River to the Nile, right? That's the dream. Israel should be that big. To close, I want to bring you this quote from Gershom Scholem. Scholem, perhaps the father of the academic study of Jewish mysticism, not perhaps, the father, writes in 1960 in his seminal article, Towards an Understanding of the Messianic Idea in Israel. And this is the last sentence of the article. And he writes, whether or not Jewish history will be able to endure this entry into the concrete realm without perishing in the crisis of the messianic claim, which has virtually been conjured up from its depth, that is the question that out of his great and dangerous past, the Jew of this age poses to his present and to his future. Whether or not Jewish history will be able to endure this entry into the concrete realm without perishing in the crisis of the messianic claim which has been conjured up, right? Judaism today holds power. For the first time in 2,000 years, we are sovereign. We have an army. Scholem asks, what happens, what is the culmination of the challenge that entering the concrete realm, entering history, entering agency, entering power will do when messianic claims rise up and try to claim that power. When people will say, we have this power not for ordinary political means or objectives, not in order to secure the right of existence and indeed self-determination for Jews, but in order to bring about the Messiah, but in order to establish in Israel a theocracy. And Scholem says this is perhaps the most important questions that Jews can ask today, and I think these groups of fundamentalists flesh out how important indeed it is. Thank you very much.